Hey guys, it's Andy here, and welcome back to another episode of Deck Doctor. This is a Abzan token deck submitted by one Andrew Ringrose. So I'm just going to touch over his version of the deck, and then talk a little bit about it, and then go over the improved version of the list, and hopefully you guys enjoy the video. So to start off Andrew's lineup, we have a 3 of Trostani Discordant, which is for 5, 3, a green, and a white. It's a 1/4 legendary creature Dryad. With other creatures you control get +1/+1. And then when it enters the battlefield, you get 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, each player gains control of all creatures they own. Pretty solid card. I like the ETB on it. The Anthem effect is always good. I'm not sure whether or not you want to be running this in a 3 of, but yeah, it's still a pretty solid card. A 3 of Seraph of the Scales, which is for 4, 2, a white and a black. It's a 4/3 angel with flying. You can pay 1 white to give it vigilance, or you can pay 1 black to give it death touch until end turn. And it's got Afterlife 2, so when it dies, you get 2 1/1 white and black spirit creature tokens with flying. Love this card, it's insanely cool. I put it in my Taser deck. That was just the Orzhov version, but yeah, insanely cool card, an absolute all-star. And a 3 of Taser Karlov, which is for 4, 2, a white and a black. It's a 2/4 legendary creature human advisor with if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. Also running 3 copies of Vindictive Vampire, which is for 4, 3, and a black. It's a 2/3 vampire with whenever another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. So again, if we have Taster out, that'd be double triggers, so that's pretty cool. It's a bit chaff. In a lot of the older formats, you'll find 2-cost, like Aristocrat style guys that have very similar abilities to this. At a 4-cost, I'm not sure whether or not this would be something that you want to be running, but it's definitely not bad in the first draft. 3 copies of Tithe Taker. Absolutely love this card. It's great in the control matchups. It's for 2, 1, and a white. It's a 2/1 human soldier with during your turn, spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast, and abilities cost 1 more to activate, unless they're mana abilities. And it's also got Afterlife 1, so it's another thing that synergizes with Taser. But yeah, really good in the more controlling matchups, adding that little bit of tax to the deck whenever they try to do something in our turn. It's usually pretty good. Andrew's also running 3 copies of Doomed Dissenter in the main deck here, which is for 2, 1, and a black. It's a 1/1 human with when it dies, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So obviously another thing synergizing with the Taser double death triggers, we'll get 2 2/2s instead of 1. 3 copies of Priest of the Forgotten Gods. It's for 2, 1, and a black. It's a 1/2 human cleric with tap sacrifice 2 other creatures. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature, and you add 2 black and draw a card. Adding a sack outlet to the deck, I definitely think it's worth having. It's pseudo removal, it draws us a card, and it gives us a little bit of ramp that could be useful in the mid to late game. Also running 2 copies of Alenda the Dusk Rose, which is for 4, 2, a white and a black. It's a 1/1 legendary creature Vampire Knight. She has lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, you put a +1 counter on Alenda the Dusk Rose, and whenever Alenda dies, you create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Alenda's power. Both of these triggers work with Taser, so if we have a Taser out and we have Alenda out, if a creature dies, she gets 2 +1 counters on her, but if she dies, we get twice as many 1/1 white vampires with lifelink. Insanely cool. I absolutely love Alenda. I had her in my Orzhov version of the deck, and yeah, it's absolute all-star. I freaking love this card. 3 copies of Flower to Flourish. It's a little bit of deck thinning in the early game. It can help get that land that we need. Or in the mid to late game, the Flourish can just win us the game. So Flower is for 1 hybrid, so green or white. It's at sorcery speed. You search your library for a basic forest or plains card, reveal it, and then put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And Flourish is for 6, 4, a green and a white. At sorcery speed, creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. 3 copies of March of the Multitudes, which is for X and 3, so a green and 2 white. At instant speed, you create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink, but it's also got Convoke. So you can tap any number of creatures you control to generate either one colorless mana, or one of whatever color the creature is. He's also running 2 copies of Divine Visitation. I absolutely love this card. I reckon it's great. It's really thematic. It's definitely on point in terms of token synergy. And it's for 5, 3, and 2 white. It's an enchantment that sits on the battlefield. And then if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. So anything that creates tokens, it then creates 4/4 flying angels with vigilance instead. So instead of us getting the 1/1s off Afterlife, or the soldiers, or the vampires, whatever, they all come in as 4/4 flying angels with vigilance. That can be an absolute game winner. If we've already got this out, and then March of the Multitudes just ends the game. It's absolutely insane. 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage here. More for the aggro matchups, it's for 4, 2, and 2 white. At instant speed, you exile all attacking creatures target player controls, and that player may search his or her library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle his or her library. 2 copies of Revival to Revenge. Revival is for 2 hybrid, so either 2 white or 2 black, or any combination of the 2. It's at sorcery speed, and you return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. In the deck at the moment, it's very limited on what it's going to be able to bring back. But the revenge side of stuff is absolutely insane. So if revenge is for 6, for a white and a black, it's sorcery speed, double your life total, and target opponent loses half their life rounded up. Yeah, revenge is insanely cool. I love the card. And he's also running a single copy of Ethereal Absolution, which is for 6, for a white and a black. It's an enchantment with creatures you control get +1/+1. Creatures your opponents control get -1/-1. And for 4, 2, a white and a black. You exile a target card from an opponent's graveyard. If that was a creature card, you create a 1/1 white and black creature token with flying. Gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of this card. Obviously, Anthem effects are great. Blanket negs to your opponent can be really good. The exile and creating more creatures, it's a good mana sink, but the 6 cost on it, kind of insane. I reckon it's a little bit too expensive for what would be a competitive deck. It's something you see a bit on Arena, but in best of ones, where you can kind of control the game out and extend the game a little bit, I feel that's where it's a little bit better suited. If you're trying to make this a little bit more of a competitive deck, it's probably one of the first things that I would consider cutting. Touching on the land base here, he's got 4 Temple Gardens, 4 Sunpetal Groves, 4 Isolated Chapels, 3 Woodland Cemeteries, 3 Overgrown Tombs, 3 Godless Shrines, 2 Plains, and a Forest. At a first glance, he seems to be running a fairly absurd amount of really high cost creatures, with so many like 6 cost, 5 cost, 4 cost cards. He has no turn 1 plays except Flower, which we may or may not want to play, or there only being 3 copies, it's not always guaranteed that we're going to get it. So probably increasing the chances of being able to play something in the early game is something that I definitely want to be looking at. Stuff like Settle the Wreckage could probably go to the sideboard, because we're not always going to be playing against creature decks. Obviously, it is good against creature decks, but probably want to go more on the game plan of adding a bit more removal into the deck, a little bit more consistency, try lowering that curve a bit. But let's see what I did to improve the deck. As you can see here, we've kept a lot of what was in the original list. We are still going with the 2 copies of Alenda. Absolutely love this card. She's an absolute all-star in anything I've tried to put her in. Yeah, she's just a great card. Everything this deck is trying to do synergizes well with this card. I'd probably even consider putting another copy of her in. She's just that good, and she synergizes that well with Teysa, which obviously is one of the big build-around cards of the deck. Kept the 3 copies of her. One thing I'll say is, if you are trying to build around a card mechanic, fairly specifically like what Teysa's got, you want to try to have it fairly reliably happen. You could even consider putting a 4th copy of her in, because she does paint quite a large target on herself. So it's not always going to be like, you won't be having too many feel bads if you're drawing into more than 1 copy of her, because yeah, it's not always going to be the case that she's going to stick. But the effects on the card are so important to the deck and how the deck works, or if the effects are so important to how the deck works, you want it to be happening as reliably as possible. So having the 4 copies is usually the way to do that. Definitely worth having the 3 copies of her in here. As I said, you could consider putting the 4th, but the 3 copies will work fine, because it's not the only route to victory that this deck's trying to take. We've also kept the 3 copies of Seraph of the Scales and the 3 copies of Tithe Taker. The tax on Tithe Taker is awesome. I love Tithe Taker and the ability it's got. Obviously, the afterlife triggers on both of these are insanely good. Everything the deck's trying to do, token synergies, death triggers, it's great. I did, however, replace the Doomed Dissenters with 4 copies of Hunted Witness. Hunted Witness is for 1 white, a 1/1 human, with when it dies, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. I thought that being able to have a turn 1 play fit more reliably, or being able to have a turn 1 play at all, was going to be better than the turn 2 1/1 that dies and gets you a 2/2. I like this a little better because it does give you the soldier with lifelink as opposed to just a 2/2 zombie. Obviously synergizing well with the Teysa, giving us 2 creatures with lifelink. More potential to gain more life. It's just, in my opinion, it's a better card than the Doomed Dissenter. So definitely worth running it in the 4 that I do have, and it also helps lower the curve a little bit. Again, helping it lower the curve, I've taken a single copy of Tristani Discordant out. It does come in and it gives you 2 guys with lifelink and an Anthem. Don't get me wrong, the card is insanely good, but at a 5 cost, I just thought that there was too many other high costed cards that it would really help bring the curve down by taking that at least 1 copy out. Definitely want to be running at least a couple of copies of her because of the token synergy and the Anthem. So definitely worth having her. I just didn't think it was quite worth having 3 copies of it. I've put 2 copies of Amara, Soul of the Accord in, which is for 2 green and a white. It's a 2/2 legendary creature elf cleric with whenever it becomes tapped, you create a 1/1 soldier creature token with lifelink. Again, adding to the low curve creatures, it's also token synergy, and with the ability to just whenever it becomes tapped, you create a token. I have added 4 copies of Conclave Tribunal, which is for 4, 3 and a white. It's an enchantment with Convoke, so Amara can convoke, tapping herself to generate mana, and then when she does, you can create tokens, or you can just send her sideways in attack. So in the early game, you can go a little bit more aggressive with Amara. A lot of the time, that's the way that you do it. You generate a couple of tokens in the early game, and then going into the mid to late games when you try to get your stuff with Convoke to generate those few extra tokens. So when this enters the battlefield, you exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. That added removal into the deck, I felt it really needed it. Adding that little bit of removal just shores up our game plan a little bit more and stops our opponents from trying to do what they want to do. Another thing you might consider putting in the deck is a few copies of Ixalan's Binding, which not only exiles as this does, but stops them from being able to play anything of the same name in the future. Another really good card, probably worth putting in the sideboard. It's not in this version of the deck, but it's definitely worth having. We also stuck with the 3 copies of Priest of Forgotten Gods. It's a sack outlet, it pings our opponent for damage, they sacrifice a creature, so it's pseudo removal, we ramp, and we draw a card. Everything about this card is insanely good for what this deck's trying to do. It gives us a way to actually sack our Seraph of the Scales if that becomes something that is worth doing. If we've got the Taster out, or if we've got the Elender out, another way to be able to sacrifice that. It's just a great card for what we're trying to do. The 3 copies of March of the Multitude stayed in the deck. Again, with the Convoker on Amara, it's great. Being able to generate tokens at instant speed on our opponent's end step, insanely good. Adding to the tokens, we are also running 3 copies of History of Benalia now, which is for 3, 1 and 2 white. Is a saga that for the first 2 turns, you get a 2/2 Knight creature token with Vigilance. And then on the 3rd turn, Knights you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Just as a side synergy thing, Elender is actually a Knight. Of all the creatures that we've got, none of them are except for Elender. So a lot of the time, it's just generating an advantage for the tokens that come out of it. But yeah, I thought it was a little bit cool that Elender actually gets the buff as well. So along with all the tokens she'll be getting on her, or all the +1 counters she'll be getting on her, it's just adding to another buff, and she's got lifelink anyway, so it's great. But History of Benalia, definitely worth running at least 3 copies of, I think. Running 4 copies of might be stretching it a little bit. Anything less, and it's not as impactful, but the value you get out of History of Benalia is definitely worth having in the deck. Adding to the tokens that you can generate in the deck, which makes the 2 copies of Divine Visitation that I've kept in even better. So if we can play Divine Visitation and then resolve a History of Benalia, we're going to get 2 4/4 Flying Angels out of it. If we play the Divine Visitation and we do the March of the Multitudes on our opponent's end step, we're going to be getting a shitload of 4/4 Flying Angels. Everything this deck's trying to do, Divine Visitation loves, so I can definitely see this as being the reason you want to do a kind of similar strategy or a build around. If you do want to rely on this mechanic specifically to win games, probably consider putting a 3rd copy in. As it is, this deck's got a few different avenues it can go down with all the creatures and kind of side synergies that it's got, so it doesn't need more copies of it. It's just another card that can help us win, and fairly reliably too. It's a really good card. Dropped it down to 2 copies of Flower Flourish. Because it doesn't ramp us, it only puts it just thins the deck a little bit and puts the card into our hand. I didn't think any more copies of Flower were really necessary, but the 2 copies of Flourish as the highest curve spell that we can play, with the exception of if we've got the mana to play March and add it to it, being able to Flourish and big Anthem effect across our board, definitely worth putting in there just as a game-winning card. I've also added 2 copies of, just tweaking it a little bit to add 2 copies of Dawn of Hope, which is for 2, 1 and a white. It's an enchantment with whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, you draw a card, and then you can pay 4, 3 and a white to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. So this is a mana sink that generates tokens, which is what we want to do. But with the amount of gain life we have in the deck, the pay 2 to draw a card is insanely valuable. So it's adding to the draw card in the deck, which is going to shore up the deck a hell of a lot more. In one of the drafts that I did for the improved version of the deck, I actually had some copies of Wilderness Reclamation, which is for 4, 3, and a green. It's an enchantment with, at the beginning of your end step, you untap all lands you control. And how the deck was going to work was basically just everything that you're trying to do at instant speed, running a lot more of the stuff that generates tokens at instant speed than it was the creatures with the Afterlife triggers. Do the 4 of Dawn of Hope, do the 4 of Divine Visitation, 4 of Fifth Use Benalia, 4 of the March of the Multitudes, so that on our end step we can tap all our lands, tap all our creatures, they untap, tap again, generate shitloads of mana, and just throw it all into March or throw it all into Dawn of Hope. I had actually seen a couple of decks on Arena recently that I've been playing against, kind of experimenting with this, so it is another avenue that you could go down. But yeah, the way that I got the deck at the moment, it works fine, it's great. But it could be a little bit quirky if you wanted to run Wilderness Reclamation and go down that path. Touching on the land base here, much the same. This is just my generic Abzan land base that I run. So the land base before probably could have been fine. It's just the way that I've tweaked it. So it's 4 of Overrun Tomb, a 4 of Temple Garden, a 3 of Isolated Chapel, a 3 of Woodland Cemetery, 2 copies of Godless Shrine, and 2 copies of Sunpetal Grove, and then 2 plains and 2 forests. So that's the main deck. I've also added in a sideboard here, and just as a side note, if you wanted to take out the Divine Visitations, if you didn't think that was something that was worth running, because some people will complain, they'll be like, oh, it doesn't do anything the turn you play it, so what's the point in having it? Obviously, unless you've got a lot of mana or a lot of creatures to play stuff like March immediately after it, yeah, you can see how that it might be an issue. The Wilderness Reclamation, again, was something that was trying to get around that. It could be great. But the other thing I considered was 2 copies of Ajani Wise Counselor is for 5. It's a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Its +2 ability is do you gain 1 life for each creature you control. Its -3 ability is creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. And then its -9 ability is you put X +1/+1 counters on target creature where X is your life total. So we can actually get to its ult pretty easy with this. So if we can throw the +1 tokens onto something, any one of the flies that we can generate in the deck, I thought that might be something that's really cool. With the +2 ability, being able to gain 1 life for each creature we control, a lot of the times this deck's going to be able to go fairly wide, so it can gain us a lot of life. Or if you wanted to consider running it just so that on the turn that you play it, you could play it as an Anthem, it's actually a cheaper alternative to Flourish if you wanted to go down that path. So Ajani Wise Counselor, it's something that I've run in other token decks, and it is insanely good value when it hits the board. Just food for thought, it's something that I considered putting in, but yeah, you don't necessarily need it in this version of the deck. Touching on the sideboard that I've added in here, we can see this is where the 2 copies of Revival to Revenge went. It's also where 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage went. Against the control matchups, we've put in 3 copies of Duress, which is for 1 black. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Because we are in the colors, and the card's too good to pass up, we are running 3 copies of Knight of Autumn in the sideboard here, which is for 3, 1, a green, and a white. It's a 2/1 Dryad Knight. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose one. It either gets 2/+1 counters on it, you can gain 4 life, or you can destroy target artifact or enchantment. The utility on this is insanely good. There's no reason you wouldn't want to be running at least a few copies of it in the sideboard if you're in the colors. There's a lot of artifacts and enchantments that are really relevant in Standard at the moment, and the ability to just gain even more life can help us against mono red, help us against the other aggro decks in the format. It's just an absolutely sensational card. I love Knight of Autumn, it's great. 2 copies of Find Finality. Find is for 2 hybrid, so green or black or any combination of. At sorcery speed, you return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. That can be really relevant in this deck. That's why I've put it in the sideboard here. If you want to slot it into the main board somehow, I'd definitely consider it because it's definitely worth putting in. And the Finality could also be really relevant as well. So Finality is of 6 for a black and a green. At sorcery speed, you put 2/+1 counters on target creature you control, and then all creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. Even just having Taser, putting the counters on her, letting all of our other stuff die with the Afterlife or whatever, and generating all of those other value creatures after the Anthem effect. Yeah, it's definitely worth having a couple of copies of, especially in the colors. And 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy, which is for 2, so it's a black and a green. At instant speed, you destroy target permanent and opponent controls, and then its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, and shuffle their library. Added removal in the deck. There's other alternatives, but it's definitely a good key piece to put in there. And I've also put in a single copy of Vraska Golgari Queen, which is for 4, 2, a black and a green. It's a 4 loyalty planeswalker with its +2 ability being you may sacrifice another permanent. If you do, you gain 1 life and you draw a card. Just another sideways synergy with us being able to sack more stuff, gains a little bit of life, and it draws cards as well. Its -3 ability is destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less, so it's also added removal. And then its -9 ability, which isn't too hard to get to, but it's not something you're going to see a lot, is you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, that player loses the game. So if we've altered with this and we resolve something like March of the Multitudes, even one of our 1/1s getting through is going to be lethal. So she's definitely an insanely cool card. You could probably consider even taking out the trophies and add more copies of Vraska and just flip the switch on the deck if that's what you want to do with it, if the original game plan doesn't work. But yeah, definitely a card worth running in the deck. Even just as the sack outlet and draw card, it's great. So that is the sideboard, and that is the main board, and that is my improved version of Abzan Tokens for Andrew Ringrose in Standard. Hopefully you enjoy the deck, Andrew. Let me know in the comments what you think. If anybody out there has a deck that they want to submit to the Deck Doctor series, just post it in the comments along with what you want done with the deck or what it's not doing. I'll add it to my ever-growing list of decks that are submitted. Happy to do them. I'll get to them eventually. Just post them in the comments and let me know. And thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks for watching, guys. As always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to see new videos as they were released. If you like what I do and you want to support the channel, you can throw me $1 on my Patreon at patreon.com/ZandersQuest. And I will see you guys in the next video. Keep questing, guys.